Hi friends, today I want to talk to you about a new tool that I actually found in my pursuit to make my editing a lot easier by utilizing OBS as my recording tool, at least for certain videos. Oftentimes I am in this situation where I have a screen recording, a camera recording, sometimes even a secondary camera recording, and bringing all of that back together in the editing process is becoming more and more of a struggle for me, and I want to make my life a lot easier. A lot of this is inspired by Meet Kevin, who is a YouTuber who is pumping out so much content it's kind of unbelievable, but a lot of that has to do with the fact that he has basically scrubbed the editing process completely from his process, and now he simply can focus on the creation of the videos and then just does one sweep throughout the process. Now, a lot of this can be achieved with devices like the ATEM Mini Pro or also with the Stream Deck and similar things. However, something that I want to specifically tackle in this video, which I just found out myself, is how you can actually use a remote keyboard, like this one here is a Bluetooth keyboard, but I also have a other keyboard, and how those two are actually able to communicate both with the computer, one being used as a standard keyboard, and this here is actually set up in a way that it is a MIDI controller. And with that plugin in OBS, this keyboard here becomes a complete control surface with a lot of keyboard shortcuts, which then can do all kinds of things inside of OBS without having to use regular keyboard shortcuts, which can, for example, not work when OBS is not in focus. At least that's something that I have recognized with macOS. Now, this whole video will focus on macOS since that is what I am using. I don't know if these solutions will work on other computers. It probably would in some kind of way, but you will have to find your own way around that. Now, the whole purpose for me was that I wanted to have a cheaper solution than to have to buy a loop deck or a stream deck, which are extremely expensive for what they can achieve. Then, of course, I also found another MIDI controller, which basically first started the interest in the whole topic of using a MIDI controller for OBS, which I'm going to also purchase and also review here on the channel. But all of that to say, this video here will focus on a completely free solution as long as you have a secondary keyboard already lying around. Now, starting out, what can you actually do with this? And for that, I can just click here on a key. And as you can see, I immediately switched the source of what I am actually seeing or what the camera is using. In this case here, we have the FaceTime camera in my MacBook. Then I also have a scene where we can see the screen, and I can see a scene where I can also click here without the screen or without myself, and then we're back on the main scene. I also can start and stop recording. You can toggle sources. You can, of course, also mute things and do much, much more. There's tons of keys available, and all of those are essentially being mapped to a MIDI node, which then can be used as a controller inside of the OBS-MIDI plugin. Now, let's jump into the setup process for this and the tools that you will need to also achieve a similar setup. And for that, we are jumping over to the screen. And of course, we will have to go out of OBS and go to this website right here. As you can see, this is a really bare bones website, and it is a tool called Hammerspoon. This is actually a tool that I want to talk about a lot more in the future because this has been an absolute game changer in the way that I use my computer. It is completely mind-blowing all the things that this thing can do. You can control the mouse, you can control stuff with the keyboard. It also can be used for example, things like MIDI controls, which is kind of mind-blowing all around. And I am using this in many different applications, like, for example, Premiere Pro, especially there, because for video editing, that makes my whole life a lot easier for marker setting, as well as speeding up things and also cutting. And I actually have a way to jump to the mouse pointer when I click on the timeline anywhere. So that's really a game changer. That whole endeavor was initially inspired by Taran from Linus Tech Tips, who has a whole bunch of macro keys and all that stuff going on. And that then inspired me to look into a way to do the same things that AutoHotkey can do, but on macOS. And with that, I found Hammerspoon, and since then I've been just basically trying to automate as many things as possible in Premiere Pro, in Audition, as well as with my general computer usage and such things. So there are going to be more videos coming about this tool specifically. But in general, the website is really minimal, and you wouldn't really know how much it can do by just looking at this. But as I want to tell you, it's really incredible. Now, for usage with the stuff that we are going to do here today, it is going to be enough to just download the latest release. So just click on the download latest release button right there, and you will end up on a site like this, and then you can download the zip file from that place. Of course, you want to unzip that file. And with that, we have the application, and that one, of course, you will want to move into the applications folder. And once you have it there, you can just double click it to start. Now, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to launch it like this. And as you can see, once you launch it, it will actually show you this Hammerspoon console. Now, if it does not show you this console, then you can actually go into the menu bar at the top here, and there is this Hammerspoon, obviously. And there you can go and open the console, open the preferences, of course, as well. And I actually prefer to not show the dock, for example, if that's something that you're into. And of course, if you launch this the first time, and with macOS, you are probably used to this, you might have to work into the accessibility something here. And you have to activate those kind of things that this actually can listen for keyboard shortcuts and stuff like that. So that's really important that you can do or have to do that there. Now, with all that done, you can, of course, open the console, and that is the screen that we have here. And then with that, the next step will be to download or copy and paste the scripts that I'm going to link in the description below. So you can check those out there. And I will just show you how the scripts look here on the screen. And then I will provide some kind of way, either through GitHub or a Google Drive document or a zip file or something, that you can download these files yourself. Because eventually you will have to have the init Lua, the second keyboard file, as well as the class singleton, which I will provide you with. Now, these files are actually kind of the programming language of Hammerspoon. Those use the language Lua, which is actually quite nice to learn and also to understand based on how it is written. Now, if you want to dive deeper into that, there are tons of resources out there and also on the website for Hammerspoon. So you can already learn a ton there if you have a little bit of a knowledge about programming. However, if you're not into all of that, you can of course also just follow me here. And I think this is going to be easy enough to just get the gist of all of that and set all of these things up so that you can work with the secondary keyboard relatively easily. Now, jumping in here, we have the first file, which is the init.lua, and this is kind of the entry point. So this is the first file that is being opened by Hammerspoon, and this is going to be the first one that is going to be run. Now, in this case, we're going to just set the default log level. Then this is actually going to be run as a message and checking whether or not the accessibility feature has already been set. And if it has not been set, then it would actually show you a message. So in this case, if I reload the configuration, you will see, is the Hammerspoon in the accessibility privacy settings activated? And yes, all good. So that's a good thing. Then, of course, we also have the other files. But before I show you that explicitly, maybe it's important to find out where those files are actually stored. Now, one of the ways to get access to all of this is hitting the Hammerspoon in the menu bar and then open config. However, there is something important to note, because that way you're only going to open the init.lua file. Now, we are also going to place files into this folder. And to get to that point, it is best to either use the terminal. So just use the terminal app and launch that one. And here, this is the default that is installed on your computer. And there you can then navigate to CD, so navigate somewhere with the tilde sign and then do .hammerspoon. And this is actually going to be the location. And if you do ls, you will find the files that are available in that folder. In this case, the init.lua, class, singleton, and so on. But this is going to be the folder that we are going to work with. Now, I personally prefer the iTerm, so opening the iTerm2 terminal, which is a bit of a more robust solution than the terminal that is provided with macOS. There we can also go and do the switch to the Hammerspoon folder and ls, and there you can see we have those three files available again. Now, if you're not that comfortable on the terminal, then of course you can also switch to the Finder, and simply by doing a open and then / and hit enter. And with that, the Finder will actually open this file as well. Now, this way you have this folder open and you have the init.lua file. This one will actually be provided by Hammerspoon itself, and then you can actually just place those other two files into this folder as well. As you build your configuration of Hammerspoon, you will actually change a lot of things inside of the init.lua file. So please don't just copy and paste the file that I am providing as the init.lua, but instead adjust your init.lua file with those lines that I am mentioning here. And the most important one is actually the one secondary keyboard right here with the require secondary keyboard. And this one actually just tells the system to load everything that is inside of this file called second keyboard. And here you can actually see the whole script that makes all of the things that I'm talking about here possible. First up, you have a bit of a documentation and telling you how to use this and install it. Then down here, we have another require, and this is because I am using a class singleton for the script here and for the coding style, which I prefer. And then the class singleton itself is just a very simple function that returns a singleton object. And that basically just makes sure that there's only one second keyboard class ever being loaded. So that's that. And then we have the code down here, and essentially we have the keyboard identifier, which we'll use to differentiate between the different keyboards and select which one should be used as the MIDI controller. And then we have the virtual MIDI controller source, which we'll have to set up in the audio MIDI setting in a moment. And then we are basically building the event tab. Now the event tab is actually just listening for all of the keyboard shortcuts on all of the keyboards. So it's listening for the keyboard shortcuts on this one, it's listening on the internal MacBook keyboard, and it's also listening for the keyboard shortcuts or keyboard presses on the other keyboard. But we want to differentiate those, and to do that, we can actually simply ask for the event flag and the code that is used as the keyboard identifier. And we're getting that with this code right here. Now, I'm not gonna just go through the whole code here, but the basic concept is that it is going to basically ask you to change this here, so the keyboard identifier, because by default in the file that I'm making available to you, this is going to be a 0, like this. And if it is a 0 and you reload the configuration, so if we bring this over like so, and we reload the configuration, and now I hit a key on this keyboard right here, I, for example, hit the Z key, you can see in the log messages that it says unknown keyboard with identifier. Now, if I hit a Z on the other keyboard, which is now the white one, and again the Z, you can see that this time around we have the unknown keyboard identifier, which is 49. And if I hit the same key on the internal one, we have the identifier 58. Now with that, we can actually take that number, and in this case the 40, and we can say here at self keyboard identifier, and we replace that and we put a 40 right there. And with that we can save, reload the configuration, and now if I hit this same key on this keyboard here, and I hit the Z right there, you can see that nothing actually happens. It's not typing a Z, so for example, if I put my marker right here in between the lines, if I hit the Z right here, it's not actually typing the Z, but it is doing the MIDI things, as you can see here, as I am now hiding and showing myself on the screen. Now, if I take the other keyboard here and I hit the Z, you can see I'm normally typing, but nothing else is happening. And that is exactly what we want from this script. And for basically, if you want to have a bit of an understanding here, it checks whether or not the keyboard identifier is 0. If it is, then it is going to ask you for the keyboard identifier. So it helps you figure out which keyboard identifier your keyboard has. But then in those cases where the identifier is set and we also have a key press and the identifier is equal to the one that is configured, then we are actually going into the process of this down here. And there we are basically saying we want to send a note on the MIDI controller, which is a note on, and we are going to make that the key code of the key that you're pressing. Now, right now, the limitation to this is that only keys that are not modifier keys are actually working. So space is working, all of the alphabet is working, the numbers are working, but for example, shift is not working, control and also option. Those things are not working as of right now in this type of setup. I might adjust the script in the future, or you may be able to also do that with a git pull request if you want to increase the usability of this tool set here. But for now, this is all that I needed, and that way I'm gonna just stick with that for now. Again, if you have any feedback to this or wanna help out or improve it, you can let me know in the comment section below or contact me through my website. That's always a great option to make this more user-friendly for everybody. But for the most part, that's the setup of the Lua script for Hammerspoon. And with that, we can actually already close all of this off because we are done in this setup here. And with that, we are done with all of this. Now, however, there's another important step, and that is actually to open the audio MIDI setup. If you use Spotlight, you can of course just do Command and Space or use the Spotlight icon in the menu bar. If you don't know where this is found, then you can go to Applications and then to Utilities and Audio MIDI Setup. We're going to launch that. Now, once this has loaded, we go to Window and Show MIDI Studio. Now, once you see this, the IAC driver is most likely not enabled. So you can double click that and then you can say Device is online. And then with that, you also want to hit the plus icon right there and add a bus called Hammerspoon. And you can rename that by double clicking onto it. So with that, we have a Hammerspoon bus, which is a MIDI device, which is basically a virtual MIDI controller, which we can send those notes to with Hammerspoon. And that's actually used inside of the scripts of the Hammerspoon script for the second keyboard. Now we have all of that set up, but now we also want to have the whole thing working inside of OBS. And for that, we need another plugin. Now we can close off the Hammerspoon thing right there. And this here is the plugin that we'll need, the OBS-MIDI plugin. Now this plugin is actually relatively new, and I'm really excited that there are other things coming, like for example macros, because right now there's only one action that you can do at any given time. Now, to be able to use this in OBS or with OBS and with all kinds of MIDI controllers, you actually will have to download the latest release. And you can do that by going to the releases or clicking on the latest release. And there you will find the downloads for different operating systems. For me, of course, I'm going to choose macOS. But if you are using any of the other systems, you might be able to set it up that way as well. But you will also find that there's actually instructions here on the page for the installation. For example, also if you have struggles with macOS or you want to use the Ubuntu version for this, there are tips on doing those things. Now for me, I'm just going to download the macOS version right here. And once you have that downloaded, you can actually just click it, install it, go through that process, and it's usually the simplest possible way ever. So with that, we can actually close all of this down, and now we are inside of OBS. And I'm just going to disable the preview by not having the confusion here. But what we are going to do inside of OBS, once you have relaunched OBS and of course installed the OBS-MIDI tool, then you can go to Tools right there, go to OBS-MIDI Settings, and there you will probably find those two buses. Because we have enabled the IAC driver and that has the default bus 1, you can of course also just rename that to Hammerspoon if you want, but it's important that one of those is called Hammerspoon with a capital H and all of the other letters are lowercase. Now here we want to hit this one and click the Enable at the bottom right there. And once you have done that, you can change over to the Configuration tab for the driver of the Hammerspoon basically MIDI device. Now here you can see a whole bunch of things, and this is really, really powerful. And sadly, it's not able to make it a little bigger, but this here gives you a lot of information about the setup keyboard shortcuts or MIDI controls that I have on this keyboard. Now, what I find really helpful there is that actually, as you have this here in your hand or on your desk, you can actually just click on the Listen 1, and then this is activated. And now let's say I want to set something onto the G key, and I can just hit the G code. And sometimes you need to do this twice or so, and I think it's already captured it. If I do this with the B, you can see this is the 11 code, and if I do it with G, that's the 5 code. Now the G code is active, and as we have made it in Hammerspoon, it is set up as a note on code. And then we have different kinds of actions that we can set up on the right-hand side. So there we can actually choose from a lot of things here. Of course, one of the most obvious things is do a transition, which is basically the way of saying select a different scene, and you can actually choose which scene you want. So you can actually say, well, let's make this the getting ready scene, for example. And then you can, of course, also say what kind of transition you want. Do you want to force one of these transitions, or you want to just select the one that is currently the active transition for your whole setup? Personally, I prefer to use the current transition because that way it is more modular, and as I change my taste, maybe I want to change to a cut instead of a fade, then I can simply do that. And with that, we can add the mapping. And now, as we have this mapping set up, I can actually just do that. However, you'll not hear me until I change back. So as I click the G button right here, we're gonna change to the getting ready screen, and then I'm gonna be back once I hit the other key. And there I am back, as this key is now set up inside of OBS-MIDI on this secondary keyboard. So now the great thing is that this keyboard here is a MIDI controller with those different scenes that I have available to me that I can switch between and make all of that happen. But at the same time, and importantly, this other keyboard does not have the same functionality and is still a regular keyboard. Like for example, here I can go up and down in the sources. But let's say, for example, I want to rename something. I can click here, right click, rename, and then I can actually ZXZ. Those are still possible because this is a different keyboard shortcut on a different keyboard, and this is not being tampered with by this script in Hammerspoon. So now all of that is set up. I hope it was kind of clear. I'm really excited about this setup. It was something that I wanted to work with for a very long time. And I'm really excited that it is actually possible to use a keyboard that you might already have lying around as a secondary keyboard for this type of setup with OBS. Now, I'm not necessarily sure how helpful this will be for programs that are not necessarily MIDI controllable, like for example, OBS is right here. But there are also a lot of more functionalities and features that you can actually program in with Hammerspoon as you get to know this tool a lot better throughout time. And there are also ways to make shortcuts available on this keyboard with other code snippets. Now overall, I hope this was an interesting or helpful video for you. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can leave those in the comment section down below. I'm very much looking forward to that. I will also feature a different MIDI controller in an upcoming video because I now actually got so excited that I got myself one of those others. However, that one is way cheaper than, for example, the Stream Deck or also the alternatives like the Loop Deck. But that MIDI controller might actually be more interesting than those alternatives because it costs less and you can use it for all kinds of different things. And I will make sure to tell you about that in that upcoming video once I have that controller in my hands. Now wrapping up, if this video was interesting or helpful, I would appreciate a thumbs up. That always helps out a lot. And of course, share it with someone that might find this useful as well. And with all that said, I hope you have an amazing day, make it your life, and make it a little bit easier inside of OBS with MIDI controls, and I see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao!